All right. Hey, everybody. So I'm here with Miss Dukes, and we are talking a little bit about her experience as a Black woman in leadership. And so I'm going to ask her to introduce herself first so that you can experience all of her goodness. She's got a lot of things going on, so I want her to talk about it. So go ahead, Tanneshia.
A ton of things. My name is Tanneshia Dukes. I'm an assistant principal in Guilford County Schools. I also co-own a nonprofit called D&M Community Partnership, where we service the community, again, eradicating those inequities that our students face, that their families face in the communities. I co-host a podcast where we talk about those educational inequities, and we interview people that we feel are top influential leaders, so that way they can make that connection within the community. So that's all.
That's a whole lot.
It is. But I enjoy doing it because they cross over with each other, so it's
Yeah.
always great.
They do. They do. I'm so happy to see that you are actually like enjoying the work that you do. And which brings me to my first question. I know as administrators, we can make it look easy. But what is one challenge that you face that you have just internally had to deal with? Like what's one challenge of the job? And for those who aspire to be administrators, what's one challenge that you would describe to them?
I would say like knowing early, right? So like I was done with my admin program, I think by my third or fourth year
Mhm.
of teaching, but I didn't initially start out wanting to do that like at all. It's funny. I signed up to go to North Carolina A&T for that admin program because there were decisions being made in our building. I was like, instead of me, complaining, let me figure out why. Why are you making those decisions? Like what political things cause it? I'm all about the mind. Like, how do you think? Like, I want to make sure I'm looking at it from your perspective. And so, just doing that. And then I fell in love with it. And I'm like, oh, wait, this is something that I could do, but that was also at 23.
Mhm.
So I was 23. I've always been the youngest in the room. So even in there, I was the youngest with experience, the youngest in the room. And then now that I'm assistant principal, this is my second year, but I'm not even 29, right? Like I'm only 28. And so as a Black woman coming into those spaces, sometimes yeah, you have people that are like, well, I looked up you and your credentials and how are you qualified? And so those are the things that we don't really think about when we come into those spaces. Cause I'm like, wait a minute, I'm an EDD candidate. They don't care about that, right? Like they're just looking at the fact of this is your age, this is what you're bringing, this is your years of experience. But I think it's letting those people know, no matter the years that you have, your experience is valuable. So we can have 4 years, but within those 4 years have been so many different places and experienced so many different things that
Mhm.
those 4 years make it seem like you have 15 years of experience, right? And so I really feel like that's one of those challenging things that I continue to face. But of course, like I told you, somebody called me Mary Poppins. I'm like, hey, it's all good. You know, it's some of those things you walk past and you're just like, it's okay. I don't have to respond to it. But as a Black woman, it's like, dang, if anybody else was going to show up, would you have that same, like, oh, they're not qualified? Or is it because I am that Black woman? And then it's being careful with my age and with my experience of, I always tread the line of not offending those that even look like me, right? Because there is I think for us as millennials, there's a way that we think about doing life, about doing work, that
Mhm.
oftentimes it's offensive to people that grew up in that work, 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 work. And it's like, no, we don't have to do that. Like, we don't have to work until we're dead. Like, that's not a real thing. Like complimenting people, making people feel great, like that's a real thing.
Yeah.
So and it's not necessarily that the other age bracket doesn't do that. Like that's not what I'm saying. I think it's just they're accustomed to the mindset. Like we don't, because we were told as Black women, you show up in that suit, you don't wear your hair natural, you ain't wearing your braids, right? I remember my first year teaching, I was like trying to interview at other places just to get a different experience.
Mm.
And it was so funny because my friends like, flat iron your hair. And I was like, oh, wow, like we're still in this. But I knew of that back then because of the fact that I attended Greensboro College. So there were a lot of things that when I'm showing up in these spaces, I had to then, it's not even necessarily a code switch at that point, because you want to progress within your arena. Like you want to make sure you're progressive, right? Like nobody wants to flatline.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to fit the spaces you're in even today. But I think showing up, fitting in those spaces as a millennial makes it, we just shift the dynamics and the mindset. So I'm actually really excited. And that's no matter the race. Like I've ran into a lot of millennials who are in this educational journey with me, and they're like, nah, we can't do that. Like we can't serve that way. Like we can't think that way. And it challenges you, right? Because you don't want to get stuck in the mold of doing things how you've always done them. And so I think that's why we run into those challenges of the ageism, right? Because that's what it is. Like people judging off the age or the years of experience, because it's that old mindset of, well, if you haven't done this 15 years, you're not effective at it. When really, sometimes your 15 years have been stagnant, right? Like who have you grown? That's one thing.
Yeah.
And what have you grown within those 15 years?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's challenging enough.
Listen, you highlighted the whole ageism thing. And you and I have a lot in common because I was the youngest assistant principal in my district, and I was there. And let me tell you, these experiences are bringing back memories. Like, I remember one time someone was like, "I'm old enough to be your mama," and I said, "But you're not. You're not my mother." And so this is the plan, and this is how we're going to carry it out, and this is how I progress monitor. Have a wonderful day. You know, I mean, and people don't really know about those experiences because there's a confidentiality clause that comes with our job, and it makes us afraid to speak out about it. But there was a lot to that. There was a lot to being in the room and being the youngest. There was a lot of trauma with that. And I think that everything you said was true. You know, you may have been in the game for 15, 20 years, but what did that 15, 20 years truly produce? You know?
Right.
And if you're not open to learning, right, from other people, then how can we truly call ourselves leaders? You know? So that's what, girl, I'm
No, it's just, I'm telling you, it's a real experience. But one thing I realized is that with some of the teachers that I serve, it was great because they were like, oh, wait, you've taught? Eureka, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and help you. So then I get that moment to take off my assistant principal hat. I'm always wearing it, but then I get to put on my coaching hat to say, yes, I did. Let's make this work for your kids, right? Because I do interchange. Some people are like, no, be the assistant principal. I'm like, it's hard because we're teachers and coaches at heart. So that instructional leadership, like that comes first for me. That's a big thing. Like, I'm like, nope. Let's figure out, I can do the other things along with that, but let's figure out how to get your kids growing and how to get you feeling great about what you're delivering in front of the kids. And it's funny because we talk about Hattie's effect size. I'm a big research person. And so like the greatest effect size is teacher self-efficacy. So how are we building up people? How they're facilitating all matters to student growth. So that's just my little tidbit. I love it.
I'm with you. I love Hattie. I was introduced to Hattie a couple of years ago, and it's that whole research project is so like it hits everything. It hits everything it's supposed to. But I want to go back to the coaching aspect. I conducted some research on my own and found that that leaders who serve in the capacity of coach and who really primarily embrace the coaching role are way more effective than leaders who embrace the managerial role. Right. And so for someone who is interested in going into admin, what can you speak to them about around coaching and really not being ashamed to still be a coach and a teacher, even in the role of assistant principal, although people view you as a manager, primarily, how can they embrace the role of coach and teacher in the role of assistant principal?
I think coaching is all about, like, when I think of coaching, I think about being relatable.
Yeah.
What ways can you basically dismantle that divide between what's happening in your front office and what's happening in your building?
Yeah.
And so, meaning there is no, and I tell our teachers that all the time, I'm like, you are my colleague, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't own you. Like,
Mhm.
we all are signed up by the same county. Like, you are my colleague. And so when I come in, I'm making sure that I'm showing up in that space as being relatable. So a way of doing that coaching again is going in and saying, how can I serve you today? Like, I know I have to deal with discipline. I know I have to put this in, I have to do that, but how can I serve you today? Do the walkthroughs,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes when you do the walkthroughs, don't write anything down.
Mhm.
Because sometimes that's very intimidating. Yes, you have to write it down. There are times I come in, I write stuff down. There are times I come in and I just stand there. And then they have to, like, they'll tell me, like, oh, do you need, nope, I'm just here, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm just showing up in the room. And then if there's anything that I want to give feedback on, it's instantly. I wait for you to finish, but before I leave the room, I'm like, hey, try this. And then I walk out, right? And if they have questions, I may stand there a while, but it's showing up, like you said, in those spaces, not having people to feel fearful of you, but knowing that you're coming in to support. Like, even when I
Mhm.
do the observation, some of them are unannounced, right? But I
Mhm.
tell them I'm using those moments to coach you and professionally develop you. So if it's something I see, it's never an I got you moment. So never come in with the I got you lens. Always come in with, how can I serve you? How can we help? How can we help you grow? And what are some things that you're interested in growing in? And know your craft, right? Like, I
Mhm.
can't tell the teachers, like, oh, your students need to be doing this. Well, what does that look like? Are you going to be in a position to show them what that looks like? Because I was the teacher that was just like, oh, you're saying this, but can you model this? And
Hello.
that's probably not a great way to be, but that was me,
Yeah.
because I was told by my beginning teacher coach, hey, ask them to model it. If you're coming in and you're nitpicking for things, you got to be able to model that, because
Mhm.
teachers now, it's not the same how when we started out. It's not
Nope.
do as I say, right? It's, are you modeling what that looks like for me? And
Right.
so with doing that, you have to know the standards. So make yourself, whatever space you are in. This principal said something last week, be where your feet are, right? So if I'm in elementary, I am serving these elementary students and the teachers. I need to know the standards from
Mhm.
K all the way to 5. Best practice is best practice, right? So you know
Mhm.
what it looks like, right? And we talk about, someone mentioned when they came, they talked about not common practice, but best practice, not things you've just commonly done because it's always been done that way, but there's no growth attached to it. But like that best practice, look for those best practices and then dive yourself in those standards, especially if you've never been in that arena. Like, I can't go to high school. I mean, I did it. I could,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I coached at high school, but what made me successful is that I realized that when I did a study of the standards, it's progressive. Like, the verb changes. It's nothing that really changes. So once you get into that, you have to sit with those standards, know what it's asking them to do, know what it looks like one below, know what it looks like one ahead, and always stay abreast on those things. I'm never above going in a classroom teaching. Our 5th grade teachers, they were like, hey, you're really great at science. That was your thing. Can you come in here? And I mean, I went for like an hour straight with the kids. I'm a picture person. We drew those pictures. We took those notes, and the feedback and response was, oh my gosh, they were actually attentive for an entire hour, and you talked for an entire hour. They were engaging, but they were like, she was literally, and this is someone who's like a 30-year veteran teacher.
Mhm.
Seriously. And she was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. But it's being relatable in the spaces that you're in, even with the students, right? Sometimes it just takes somebody else coming in saying what you've already said. But as an assistant principal, that was a moment where it was just like, oh yeah, they're buying in. Why?
Mhm.
Because I was never above doing that. I was
Mhm.
never above being the coach, being the teacher, yeah, that's just
Oh my goodness.
I
That
hope
is
that answered the question.
Oh, you listen, you answered all my questions on the first round. But all of this is so good. And I just want to point out one last thing, how you were talking about best practices and how oftentimes we throw, okay, research-based practices, but not all research-based practices are evidence-based. If that, you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
because somebody said that it works, how has anyone proven that it works? Is there evidence that it works? And it's crazy that you mentioned best practices because sometimes I think we get a little misconstrued about what that is. And if you don't know best practices, and you're already an administrator, you need to be asking for help.
Right, right.
Asking for
And it's
help.
okay to ask for help.
Yes.
Like we're ever evolving. Like I remember on a podcast series, like we said that although we are assistant principal, my co-host is now an interim principal, but we're always learning, right? We always make sure we're in a seat of learning. I can call him or my mentor and say, I don't know what this standard looks like in practice. Help me, right? And that's the executive standards for us. Like, I'm like, show me, tell me what it looks like in practice, right? Not because oh, just to check a box, because I want to know. Because if I'm leading people, I have to know and I have to be responsible for saying, I don't know everything. And that's okay. I'm not an expert, right? At all. It's ever evolving. So yeah.
Yay! This was so good. I'm sure we could have went for a whole hour, but I know that you have
I
things.
know. I'm so sorry. It's okay.
Hey, listen.
Professional development calls.
Yes,
It
yes,
calls.
yes,
But
yes.
yeah.
And so this will not be the last time, but I want you to tell everyone where to find you. Like if they're looking for Tanneshia Dukes, where can they find her on social media?
Well, I am on Twitter. That's really my educational like arena. So I am on Twitter and it's the @ Dukes Teaches All. On Instagram, it's just my name, Tanneshia Dukes. On Facebook, it's my name, Tanneshia Dukes. Probably not the best way. Once your students get older, they start to find you. But it's okay because there's never anything that's not motivational. So it's okay. I feel good about it.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'm going to put all that in the show notes so that people can
Okay.
click and then they can find you. But otherwise, thank you for being a guest and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you.